Welcome to Off Script with Sally Hernandez. On January 10th, 19-year-old Rachel went on her usual 5 to 6 mile jog in the small town of Georgetown, Texas. Georgetown is a quiet, small city, the place you move to get away from the big city crime of Austin. Rachel was on winter break from college and visiting her parents, Robert and Janet Cooke, and her younger sister, Joanne, for the holidays. That morning, her parents kissed her goodbye and left to work. Rachel slept in and then woke up before noon to go on a run. Neighbors said they waved hi to her as she ran on the side of the road, her blonde, short hair pulled back in a ponytail, and she had her earphones on listening to music. She was last seen 200 yards away from her house, and Rachel never came home. The vibrant, sassy college student from a small town has been missing since 2002. As a reporter in Austin, it was one of my first big assignments, and it is still an unsolved case.
This is who we're looking for, 5'2".
Concentrate on the ground.
Possibly a Trans Am, older model.
At first, Rachel wasn't even classified as a missing person case. The sheriff at the time, John Maspero, didn't launch an immediate search when Rachel's parents reported her missing. Her boyfriend at the time said the sheriff told him perhaps Rachel ran away with someone else.
The sheriff made a huge mistake, and I certainly believe that they had one of the worst leaders for the biggest missing person case they've ever had.
But Rachel's parents knew something was wrong. They started their own search, and eventually the sheriff joined in. Hundreds of volunteers from all over Texas went to Georgetown in search of the missing college student. It was the first major project for EquiSearch, a team of volunteers on horseback, started by a man whose daughter was murdered years ago. Missing person flyers went out to the media and to the neighborhood. Call the hotline if you know about suspicious men driving a white Trans Am, last seen in the neighborhood when Rachel was jogging. For years, it was the only update. Mistakes were made, and some say valuable time was wasted, and the case grew cold, but it wasn't closed. In 2006, a man named Michael Keith Moore said he killed Rachel. He was already in prison when he made that confession. He was serving a life sentence for slashing a pregnant woman's throat, killing her while she begged on her knees for her life in 2003. He told investigators it was back in 2002 when he was driving around in Georgetown, the neighborhood, when he saw Rachel, hit her in the head with a hammer, raped and dumped her body along the coast hundreds of miles away. Investigators believed him, and when it was time for him to give Rachel's friends and family finally the answers they had been searching for, he dropped a bombshell in the courtroom. The cruel and twisted announcement threw Rachel's parents into another level of pain. And by this time, the weight, the grief, and the obsession to find Rachel grew heavily on Janet and Robert. It broke their marriage. Robert, so close to the investigation, had to one time defend himself when he failed a polygraph test. But Janet never doubted him. She lost her daughter and her husband, but not hope. And that has to do with the new sheriff in town. Sheriff Robert Chody is a millionaire. His wife won the Texas lottery. And Chody doesn't need to work. He doesn't need the stress or the pressure of solving the biggest missing persons case out of Williamson County. But he's doing it anyway. His approach is different, it's new, and it's aggressive. The FBI is now involved in the search. All the witnesses and persons of interest are being re-interviewed. And in April of 2018, perhaps the biggest break in the 2002 case, detectives found something. It was big, and I couldn't believe it when I heard it. They found what could be a major clue in the case, but they haven't found Rachel yet. This is an off-script conversation with Sheriff Robert Chody. So I've covered the Rachel Cooke case from the very beginning.
Really?
Yeah, in 2002. When she first went missing, I was a little cub reporter right out of college. My first assignment really over at KXAN. So I've interviewed lots of people in the case, from her parents
to investigators, to the sheriff back then, but I've never interviewed you about it.
No, and we have a different approach too. So
You do, which I'm fascinated by, and so we'll get to know that approach. But for our listeners out there, this is an off-script discussion with Williamson County Sheriff Robert Chody here. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. Let's start with not too long ago, you said that this is a case that even though she was last seen in 2002, with not a lot of movement in suspects or in clues, that this is a case in 2018, now that you're over it and your investigators, that can be solved. You truly believe that you can figure out what happened to Rachel?
We do, and because there are a lot of things that you're not privy to that I am, that I won't discuss. But there's also a lot of things that prior administrations didn't do in this investigation that they couldn't do due to technology. There are a lot of things that they didn't do, that policies and procedures that weren't implemented back in those days that are now implemented. There are some just techniques that they should have done that they didn't do that we're doing now. So there are a lot of different avenues and approaches that we're taking that I think we hope to have that keeps us optimistic and feel that we have a chance, I should say. I've had an opportunity to meet with Janet Cooke, the mother, and I never get her hopes high per se, but we talk on a regular basis. And I just inform her of where we're at and what we're going with. And I don't give her everything, and she knows that. And she doesn't even ask about everything. I mean, she's been through a lot. Mm-hmm. She's a true sport, a character in itself, and a great lady. And she's been through a lot. And I try to be sensitive to that. But we really feel positive in the direction that we're going with the cold case unit that we created. Yeah. That wasn't there when we got there. And, in the past, they've had what they call task force. And, we've had different agencies on it before. And, they all, I think, did the best they could with what they had, the information. But, the administrations prior, and I'm not trying to blame just one specific administration, but they had a different philosophy in this investigation, and some of it I totally disagree with. Mm-hmm. And we're just being more proactive and very active in it, and we have resources with it, and we're committed to it.
Let's talk about that prior administration, because there are many critics out there who would say it was the then sheriff at the time in 2002, which was John Maspero. The critics would say that he waited too long to launch a search, that it was really Rachel's parents who called in EquiSearch, which was a huge group back then, and it is still now for our listeners who don't know who they are. That is the same team that went to go and help with the Natalie Holloway case years later, the missing student in Aruba, with Kaylee Anthony out of Florida, when her mother was acquitted of killing her. Before then, EquiSearch was called in to help with the Rachel Cooke case, and that was really from her parents. A lot of the criticism for the sheriff back then was that you didn't do enough to look for her in the first place. Is that some of the disagreement you're talking about?
It is. And I'm not here to talk negative about it, because you're speaking of Sheriff Maspero.
Correct.
He's no longer alive.
Right.
And I'm not here to speak ill, but I think we have to be willing to call out, too, what was done wrong in this case, because the Cooke family deserves that, because Robert Cooke, the father, has passed away not knowing where his daughter is. And as a parent myself, I couldn't imagine going through what he's gone through. But yeah, there were some missteps, in my opinion, from what information I have, that the Sheriff's Department at that time did not react appropriately or fast enough in the investigation, from what I understand. The timeline was crucial when we talk about missing persons, especially adults, especially a young lady home from college, when it was what we believe to be dismissed as a young college girl who was home just partying it up, and she'll be back when she's back. And we think we lost some valuable time there. And I think that's still true to this time, that we lost some very valuable time. And not only that, but when they did respond, when the sheriff's office did respond, you had volunteers who meant to do a great service for the Cooke family. And I'm not here to bash them either. But the house was the only evidence that we had of any potential evidence to gather. And you essentially had all the volunteers and law enforcement as well. And that house was never, not one piece of evidence came out of that house. And that was the last place that we know for a fact that she was seen at, and as well as outside the house. And there was no evidence gathered from that area that probably isn't helpful, because all the volunteers were in there comforting the family, and they were, so we weren't not able to get any valuable evidence out of there that could have maybe came back to a suspect.
What was the thinking of, supposedly, was it if you're missing only for 24 hours, then you're considered a missing person? Is that true?
No, it's not true. And I don't know if it was true back then. I think because, and this is just me guessing, I think part of the mindset too was that, Georgetown was a small community back then. I mean, I know it's 2002 and we can't even fathom that thought now where we're at in Austin now. But back then, this didn't happen in Georgetown, especially in that area of Georgetown. You did not even hear those things except on the Austin news. And even in Austin, it was not really that heard of that as often. So, I mean, from a law enforcement perspective, I think maybe that was the driving motivation as well. It doesn't mean it was right, but also law enforcement at that time in Williamson County was a much smaller agency too. You're talking a community that was maybe 70, 80,000, and I'm guessing, I don't know. I mean, it was a small one, but we're over a 500,000 people now, and you're talking a very small agency now, then. That what were their policies and procedures like, if any? And I know when I came into office, they had policies and procedures, but they were way outdated, and that was just a year and a half ago. Right. And back then, they didn't even have computers in their cars. They just got introduced into a computer system for that county at that time back then, and it wasn't even a good system. We don't even use that system now. So, I mean, I think there are a lot of variables that people aren't aware of, especially now. Now, back then, I think there were some balls dropped in the areas of that thing. But I'm talking about from the technology aspect, from the mindset aspect. I think there were some areas that I can somewhat relate to if I try to, be fair to both sides. But in the long run, I think law enforcement, the Williamson County Sheriff's Office, could have handled some things differently. That could have maybe just had I don't know that it would have solved the case, but we would have a better foundation to start looking where we are today. Before
he died, I tracked down Sheriff Maspero back in 2011 after he was ousted for some pretty inappropriate things that he was accused of. But on the phone, he said, look, I brought in the FBI. I brought in the Austin Police Department. I brought in the Texas Rangers. And he said he was disappointed. People wanted to find Rachel.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
I think that's true. I think so. Let's talk about after, the crucial hours of the 2 or 3 days that we're talking about where we think the ball was dropped. I think after that, I think those agencies did get together, and I think Sheriff Maspero himself was truly trying to find Rachel. I don't think the whole case was boggled by any means, and I don't think Sheriff Maspero dropped the ball in every aspect at all. And the investigators, we currently have employees right now who are part of that investigation, and I can tell you they have every desire to find Rachel. And I believe that was true for Sheriff Maspero as well. Right. I think he made some mistakes, but I think once he realized how serious it was, I really do think he was trying. Now, after a certain amount of time, I would sit here and argue with you, and not just Sheriff Maspero, but some sheriffs after, I would say, I think they could have done a better job on picking up not just the Rachel Cooke case, but other of these cold cases to try to be more proactive in trying to solve these cases. And what I mean by that is, in Rachel's case as well as these other cases, you get detectives who have current cases, and they were assigned a cold case, or what we call cold case, the Rachel Cooke case or another case that's not solvable, or it's very hard to find leads on, like in the Rachel Cooke case. And that file is pushed back behind all the other current cases. So therefore, over time, it's getting less attention, and then a lot of time starts passing up, and those leads start going away, and then before you know it, it's in the back of the desk, and then all of a sudden it disappears to another desk, and then before you know it, it only comes out when you mention the name or an anniversary or something like that.
How is that possible, though? It's like the biggest missing persons case, I think, in Central Texas that is still unsolved. How are you not working on that year after year, day after day?
You're asking the wrong person that, because I don't know how that's possible. Because when I ran for office, I was approached by the Cooke family, and not just the Cooke family, but another family who had it's a murder case that we're dealing with, the cold case, and their biggest their biggest gripe and concern was, we just want to know what information is going on with our case. And in both of the cases, those two cases, they said, you don't even have to tell us you solved the case. Just tell us what's going on currently with the case. And if you're not working it, that's fine. Just tell us. And it broke my heart when I heard that, because these families, they're not even seeking justice at this point. They just want communication.
Right.
And that's kind of how this whole cold case unit was created, because we're doing something unique, as you well, and your listeners may not know, but we're using reserve deputies, retired detectives from agencies around the country who want to work for the sheriff's department, and they're working for us for free.
Wow.
And just yesterday, we had 2 detectives, retired detectives who work for free. They flew their private plane at the cost to themselves to check on some leads to a case, one of our cold cases, and I won't say which one. But that's the value they bring. And these are experienced investigators. One of our investigators, a Houston homicide detective who was handling 60 cases a year in Houston by himself. And I mean, this is the value that we're getting from these detectives. And that's what this cold case unit is bringing to us. We have over 20 detectives that are assigned to this cold case. We have 6 of those detectives assigned just to the Rachel Cooke case.
How did that conversation even start? How did you say, because you could have said, we don't have enough manpower for this.
Well, that's exactly what I said initially, because it was an idea that when I first got into office, the idea didn't even generate until I got into office. But I sat down with some of the detectives when they were updating me on the cases. And when the Rachel Cooke case came up, they gave me just the tidbits of all the cases. And I was amazed at all the cases, of course, but I was concerned about the Rachel Cooke case because I met with Janet, as well as the Shrugs case, the Ritchie case, we call it. And that's a murder case in Taylor that's 30 years old. And I said, I have family members who want some answers. What can we say to them? And I want to tell them what I can. So then I spoke to a detective who was dealing with the Rachel Cooke case. And I'm looking at the Rachel Cooke case. The file is as thick as it is long. And I gave him the case back and I said, here's what I want you to do. And remember, this detective also has other cases, current cases. And I said, hey, take this back. I want you to look at it again and tell me if you see anything different. And when I saw his eyes, he looked at me not with disgust, but with almost defeated, because he knew he would have the same thought. He knew that it wouldn't change his mind on who the suspect would be or suspects. And I realized then I was, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And then I knew, what can we do different? And so then I just started thinking about a reserve program that law enforcement currently does now for patrols. They just get somebody who works at Dell for the week and they want to drive 100 miles an hour on a Saturday. And the law allows us to provide a commission to somebody who goes through an academy to work for us for free in exchange for their services to their community. So I said, I wonder if there's an avenue to do that with retired people, detectives who already have the investigation experience, because that's what we're looking for. But I didn't know if we'd have the desire, because when people retire, they do that. But, retirement people are the hardest working people I know. But I didn't know. But then a media outlet found out about it, and I was surprised how they found it, which means I had a leak in my office because I was not ready to speak about it yet, but I was kind of put in a corner because they wanted to do a story on it. And I asked the media outlet to hold off on the story. They gave me a week because I wanted to talk to the families first. I wanted to get their permission. And they were kind of excited about it. But I also used that opportunity when I spoke to the media to try to recruit these detectives to see if there would be any interest, because I didn't know at that time. And I was pleasantly surprised once the story aired. We started getting resumes and we were interviewing, and we're still getting resumes. It was crazy to me that we had that many retired people who wanted to work. And I'm talking quality retired investigators, like the Houston person. We have one from LA County. These are all people who live in our community. We have a current chief of a small town who has investigation experience, but he works a full-time job, but he also helps us out when he's able to. We have some federal government retirees. I have a person who worked for the Department of Defense, New York City best-selling author who's involved with this. I mean, so we have some very high-quality people. I can't even mention his name. But I mean, so that's exciting for us. And then I also have a full-time sergeant who helps manage these people, and a full-time detective who also helps with the aspects of our technology within the Williamson County Sheriff's Office with these reserve deputies. So it seems to be working well. We're chasing leads on a regular basis. In the Rachel Cooke case, we've had over now 1,700 that we've been looking at. We've re-interviewed all the witnesses, as well as suspects that were on the list and some that we don't think should be on the list. So things are really progressing in the direction we want, but we want finality to it too, and we're just not there yet.
How long is the suspect list?
We're probably up to a dozen people right now. There's probably a couple that could come off it. We just haven't checked that one or final, box yet. So, I mean, that's where we're at.
Right. That suspect list, has it been cut down significantly, or did you start with 12?
Well, it had a few on there, but we added a couple too during my time. And it doesn't mean that they're strong suspects. It just means that we can't eliminate them for one reason or another. And the biggest advantage that we've had since we started this cold case is the partnership we have with the FBI. The FBI has been extremely helpful with our cold case unit. When we thought we had a report of a body up in Liberty Hill area, they brought their whole team, evidence recovery team from San Antonio. I mean, there was over 30 agents down here helping us, and this was off a day notice when we called them. And then they offered help with the reward, the $50,000 reward, total of $100,000 with the Cook family's reward. So, I mean, and this is something that they didn't do until we came into office, and that's because the partnership and the relationship that we have with them has been extraordinary. And I can't say enough thanks to the FBI. They've been very helpful with us, and I love our partnership with the FBI.
Isn't that one of the most saddest realities of this case, is that whenever there is skeletal remains, whether it's in Williamson County or in Travis County and Austin, that is something that goes through Janet. Rachel's mom could that possibly be Rachel?
Well, when that happens, what I try to do is I call her first because as soon as I hear about it, I just assume that somebody in the media probably knows.
Yeah.
So I immediately call her first, and we have a routine. As soon as I call her, because sometimes I call her just to say hello, but I always preface it with, she'll say, "Hey, what are you doing?" I say, first of all, this has nothing to do with the case, or I have no new information, because I never want to get her hooked. But she is really amazing in the aspect that I don't think it matters what I say to her. She seems to be ready. She doesn't seem fazed. I know she has to be, but she never seems fazed. She's just a strong lady, very strong lady.
When you pick up the phone and you do have something to say to her, do you yourself get excited for the prospect of maybe bringing her home?
I do. You talking about, say that again?
When you do call Janet and you do say, "Hey, I have something to say," do you yourself get excited about that tip, or are you just as reserved?
I'm reserved too. I mean, I get excited too. There's sometimes information that's passed to me that when it's passed to me, I'll have that discussion with the person who's passing it to me, and I'll get their input of, is this something you think I should share with Janet? And if so, do you think this raises her hopes too much? Or is this something we should wait a little longer? Because I don't want to do that. And it always goes back to, she needs to know. It doesn't matter what it is, she should know. If it's something we can share, if it's not something that would compromise the investigation. And so if it's something that doesn't compromise it, we try to share it with her, because I think that's just important. I mean, she's been in the dark for so long.
Right.
I don't want her to be like Robert and not know, if something happened to her, I'd want her to know that everything she knew that I had information of prior to that. And that's what we try to do.
Did you talk to Robert before he passed away, or did you take office afterwards?
I didn't know Robert at all, and that's kind of my driving force. I try to think of what he must have felt like, because speaking to Janet, about Robert, me and Janet get pretty personal. It's crazy how a tragedy like this has gotten me and her so close. I'm helping her with a service dog. We were talking about that earlier today, but I didn't get the opportunity. I know it put a strain on them, obviously, but she adored Robert, but she's excited about what we've been doing, because we took so many proactive aspects with, we were on that crime show.
Crime Watch.
And I got her permission before we did it. Yeah. Then we also have an opportunity. We signed a contract with a production company to try to do a show on our cold cases. We don't know that they're going to pick us up, and it's been a long time now. So they did a trailer with us. They came down and filmed a trailer to do it, and the main case obviously was the Rachel Cooke case. Again, I got her permission, and I told her the pros and the cons of it. The reason I wanted to do it, I told her, was it reaches a wider audience. When the crime occurred, that was Williamson County in 2002. A lot of people have moved. And if they moved the day of the crime or even a week after and they didn't share information with the, law enforcement, and they're in Idaho or they're in Montana, wherever that state is, and they forgot about this case,
right,
then they could see it on Crime Watch or on this show. If they do the show, then we have another opportunity to reach another witness. And that was my whole goal. And it's a win if we get one bit of information. And she agreed. And then she gave us the green light to do that. And we did.
This was the first case that I thought of, what can I do this episode on, this podcast? It was Rachel's case. It's a case that has stuck with me. And I think it really has shaped me, throughout my years here. She was just running. She was a 19-year-old who was on her run. She wasn't running in an unfamiliar place. She could be any 19-year-old right now running. And that's it.
And she felt comfortable in her environment.
Right.
There's no telling what was, she was 200 yards from her home. We know that to be a fact. We have witnesses who place her 200 yards from her house. You feel secure when you're in your neighborhood, in your home. And I can't imagine what she must have went through and what happened. But I know we're trying all our efforts, and we're not going to give up. As long as I'm sheriff, we're not going to give up. I feel confident that we'll find out something. You think about the car that we found. Mm-hmm. We're talking, 12 years ago, well, not 12 years ago, 16 years now. Yeah. I keep saying 12 for some reason. Yeah. But that's a pretty significant find for us. That was something that was, I don't know how that was overlooked in the investigation. That car is discussed in the investigation with some witnesses and suspects, and we found it 16 years later.
But that is mind-blowing to me, because when I'm thinking back, okay, the search, I remember getting a flyer with 3 suspects, their sketches, and on the bottom of the flyer it said last seen in a possibly white Trans Am. Flash forward 16 years later, you're up on a news conference saying, hey, we found a vehicle. And the first question is, what type of vehicle? And you say it is a white Trans Am. How in the world did that happen?
That is because of those experienced investigators that are working for free for the Williamson County Sheriff's Office, and some intelligence and good investigations, going back, talking to witnesses and possible suspects, and putting the information together and calling the right people and doing the right thing, doing basic investigations and not giving up. And that's what, imagine that, I'm here to tell you that they could have had that vehicle when this happened.
Wow.
And if that's the case, right now that car, the FBI, they did a forensics sweep on that, and we're waiting on the results of that. Imagine if they would have had that car 16 years ago. I'm hopeful that they get something in it, but it's more likely not. But if Rachel was in that car 16 years ago, I guarantee it would be more probable that something would come out of that forensic sweeps then than now. And so that's a big miss. That's a big miss.
What does it tell you in your gut? Is this the car that was seen in the neighborhood? Was Rachel in that vehicle?
Well, I can't say that necessarily, but I would tell you that we don't have that car for no reason.
Where did you get it from?
It came from the Dallas area.
Okay. And you had detectives who were looking through this case file who tracked it back to the Dallas area and then brought it over to Williamson County?
Yes.
And then what happened?
Well, then we had the FBI, our partners with the FBI came down and they did a forensic sweep of the vehicle, and the trunk. And a lot of the vehicle was weathered, windows were broken out, and it was an open field areas where it stayed for a lot of time. So we were just checking the trunk area was the main focus. There was some other parts of the car that they took some tests on, and we sent all that swabs and all that testing product to the FBI Quantico, and we're waiting the results on that to see if anything comes back.
Do you have people who are tied to that vehicle who are on that suspect list?
Yes, we do. In fact, we had 2 suspects that we knew were on that list that we could tie to that vehicle, and possibly a third.
Have you interviewed them yet?
I can't comment on that. And there's some things that, and I'm just trying to protect the investigation.
Absolutely.
But yeah, there was, and I said that in the news conference, that there were 3 suspects tied that were on that list we believe are tied to that vehicle.
Well, then let me ask you this. What can you tell me that you haven't been able to say since then?
Oh, I don't know that because there was so much that we've said and not said. You would have to ask a specific question, and I would either have to decline or not. I don't know that off the top of my head.
The two people that were on that list, are they two people that Rachel knew?
I can't comment on that.
Okay. Are they familiar to law enforcement before then?
I wouldn't comment on anything. I would say suspect, and that's it.
Got it. Is Michael Keith Moore on the suspect list?
He is, and he has been. He was on the suspect list when I got there. I mean, remember, he confessed to it,
right,
and then backed out of the deal and putting the Cooke family through, havoc when they expected him to, because he self-confessed, and that was another thing that he put the sheriff's department through a clown show. It was just a horrible ordeal for law enforcement, for the Cooke family. It was just horrible. But yeah, he was on the suspect list then, and he's still on the suspect list now.
And just a little background for our listeners. Michael Keith Moore is a convicted killer. He was serving a life sentence for slashing a pregnant woman's throat in 2003. But when he was in prison, he confessed to killing Rachel in 2002, he says, right?
That's right.
And then what happened?
Well, then as the investigators started investigating, he told them where the body was at, which was off the coast, because he was already in prison for the murder before. And so the investigators go to the prison, pick him up to take him to the coast to ask him to show where. They literally feed this Mr. Moore guy and, burgers. They're being very polite to this guy, that's what you want to call him, because they're hopeful that they're going to get the at least location and through her in the coast according to him, and so they feel confident. Okay, he's confessed. This is what he said. It makes sense. There's no other reason. There's no reason to doubt it. He's a convicted murderer, and now he's. Who in their right mind confesses to another murder, and unless they've done it, So they lined up all the T's and dotted all the I's and brought it back to the DA. DA brought it to the judge and said, hey, he's confessed. He's ready to plead guilty. The families come in. Everybody comes in. The news media comes in because everyone is expecting him to plead guilty. And he changes his mind when the judge says, how do you plead? He says, not guilty.
Not guilty.
And people were shocked.
Yeah.
Shocked. You can see the faces of Janet and Robert Cooke. They're almost saying, what did he say? Like, he didn't say what I think he said, did he? Because I just misunderstood or something. It was unbelievable.
I remember getting a tip from Rachel's family saying that there was this guy who confessed, and his name was Michael Keith Moore. He was already in prison. He was serving a life sentence. So we get ready. We blast it out to the media because I asked for an interview with him in prison. Get all the way to the prison, and suddenly the guard says, Michael doesn't want to talk to you anymore. He was playing games with us, and he was also playing games with you. So why is he still on your suspect list?
Well, it's just because we can't take him off the list. Again, he confessed. If we can get something to say that to prove that he didn't do it, then we would take him off the suspect list. Remember, we had 12 people at least on that suspect list. 12 people didn't do it. So we just can't take them off. And, whoever gets charged with this crime, we want to be able to say with confidence that we have checked all the boxes that we can, and we understand that we're talking about sentencing somebody to life, if not, whatever, that we've checked every box that we can, and we believe with, every part of our being, our heart, that this person is guilty of this crime. And we can say why we don't think these other 11 people didn't do it, or whatever the case. So, until we have something to do that, then we can't.
On this list, are there any family members?
No, I don't think so.
And you're very protective on why some people were saying that the Robert Cooke failing a polygraph test. You're very protective about, why he did fail a specific question, which the question was, do you know where Rachel is? Right.
And he said no. And that was the only question that showed deception. And he took a hit for that because, but what he shared with investigators after that was that he goes, the only reason I can even make it make sense is because in my mind, I believe I know where my daughter is, and I believe she's in heaven, which alludes to he believes his daughter's dead. And if he believes that, remember, we're talking about a polygraph, that's what, it reads. And even Janet told me that, look, and remember, they were divorced.
Yeah.
Janet told me and said, look, I want you to know that me and Robert may be divorced, but there is no way you would convince me that he had anything, not anything remotely close to being associated with Rachel's disappearance or death, if that was the case. And she was adamant about it. I mean, this is somebody who divorced her husband. And I believe it too. So with that, it makes sense to me. I mean, it just makes sense. And that was the only deception. And he worked till he died trying to find out where his daughter was at, and unsuccessful in doing that.
How personal, though, is that to you as a dad?
It's very personal, you know. I mean, I certainly don't let it interfere with what we're doing. It drives us to do the right thing. It drives us to create a cold case unit and be proactive. It drives, and because it's not just me. I'm the sheriff that's created the program, but we have some hardworking people in Williamson County Sheriff's Office in the cold case and all in general. But the cold case unit, the people that are supervising, the chiefs that are helping oversee that, the intelligence unit that are finding cars and things of that nature, the interrogation. There's a lot of work that goes into it, and we are getting updates daily on one case or another. And I will get calls at home at nighttime. I mean, it's amazing the work that goes into this. And so that's personal to me. We're taking it personal. And because if that was my child, I would want to know that law enforcement is doing everything they possibly can. And I want Janet, I want the Richies, I want them all to know, because I've reached out to another victim of one of our cold cases. She lives an hour away from Williamson County. It's the first time she'd been notified about her family's case. And I'm just shocked at that. But they need to know that we're doing everything we can, and we are.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to what your gut is telling you, is it that Rachel knew her attacker, or was this a stranger who did this?
I don't know. We're going to go where the evidence leads us, and I think that's where we have to stay at this point, because I think saying anything other than that, I think, can jeopardize or hurt the case. But I can tell you that I don't know that we have enough to say gut yet. I can tell you we had 12 suspects on the list, and I think the person on that list is responsible. One of those people on that list is responsible.
What about ex-boyfriend, somebody who maybe had something or reason why they would be mad at Rachel?
I think it's one of the people on our list. That's all I would say.
Okay. Where are we going now? What leads are you looking into now?
Well, obviously, we're waiting on the response from the car. So that's one of the big things that we're waiting on. We don't know how long that's going to take. There are some things in the workings that I can't share with you. We're doing not daily, but we're doing regular interviews with witnesses still. We're doing some DNA stuff still. One of the challenges, too, that we're still finding is missing evidence, missing reports. And you don't know that they're missing, or if the investigator at that time didn't do one, or he didn't think to do one, he or she didn't think to do one, or that they meant to do one, or it's just been misplaced. One of our goals at this point is, in the creation of this cold case unit, is no matter if I have another term next term, or if I do stay another term, which that's my desire, but I won't be sheriff forever. But whoever comes in, whenever that time is when they come in, they will have a cold case file that is complete as complete can be. They will have a starting point and ending point. They will have a history of what's been searched and what's not. Because, we searched Rachel Cooke's area where she was missing from, the 200 yards where she was last seen at,
right,
with metal detectors. And I was accused of a dog and pony show because that area had already been searched. And I said, where's the documentation? I said, if that's been searched, and what happened was it had been searched by physical volunteers, we were doing metal detectors. We had 20 metal detectors out there, maybe more. We had an association of metal detector people out there. And I said, now there's a record of, nobody will search that area again with metal detectors.
There weren't records of places that were searched?
No, that's the problem. And then sometimes there's a record of it, but it's not there. We don't know where it's at, or because people will say, well, they did this. And my question to them is, okay, where's it at? Because if so, I don't want to double our efforts. But if so, we need to put it in that file, because If you're just telling me you did it and you have no way to prove it, then we can't check that box to take that one suspect off or add that suspect or whatever it is. And that's what we're trying to do. That's how we can go to a judge or a jury and say, we're confident it's this person or these people. And we can't do that if we're not checking those boxes off. And it doesn't matter how I feel and how strong I feel about the person doing it. I've got to prove it. We've got to prove it. So that's what, we're thinking of the case as a whole picture here, and those are a lot of things that have been left out. And these cold case detectives and detectives full time, and the sergeants that are doing it, that's what they're doing, and they're doing a marvelous job.
If it's been kept such a secret for so long, for 16 years, since 2002, what makes you think that somebody's going to mess up and we're going to find out what happened? Because
you don't know what I know, and somebody will. Somebody will. And not only that, there's evidence out there. Would you think that we would have got that car last year? You were just telling me you were surprised.
Stunned.
Stunned. But we got it. And it may not have any evidence value. I don't know. I'm hopeful it does. But it's another checkbox we can mark off too. And then we can go to another direction. So maybe we'll stun you again.
Sheriff Chody, thank you for your time.
It's my pleasure, and thank you. And if anybody has any information, we need them to call 1-800 the FBI, 1-800-FBI.
Got it.
And then they can contact the sheriff's office, 512-943-1300, or we have a Facebook for our cold cases as well, or they can contact any of our social media contacts, Williamson County Sheriff Robert Chody, Williamson County Sheriff's Office, our Twitter, Sheriff Robert Chody, any way to contact us, please. They can remain anonymous if they wish. There's a reward of $100,000. They can call Williamson County Crime Stoppers. There's the FBI. There's many avenues they can do it. We just need help still, though, and we're still asking for it.
Hope you get it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In our next episode of Off Script with me, Sally Hernandez, an exclusive long-form conversation with Rachel's mom, Janet Cooke. It is a heartbreaking conversation you will not see on TV. No script, no limits, just a conversation about the pain of a mother not knowing if her daughter is alive or dead, and the fear of finally finding out. Please make sure to subscribe to Off Script with Sally Hernandez on Apple Podcasts or iTunes or anywhere you find podcasts.